This is Creepy and Geeky. Hey, all you creeps and geeks. I'm your host, Robert, and today's episode concludes the Friday the 13th series of episodes with Freddy vs. Jason and the Friday the 13th reboot. Joining me today is no stranger to the show. Kat Hughes is a film journalist who primarily writes for the Hollywood News, and she's a repeat guest. Welcome to the show, Kat.
Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, it's always good having you on. We tend to have a good time. You are joining me, like I said, for the conclusion, the last two movies so far of the Friday the 13th series. One is um, kind of a epilogue of sorts to the original series, and the other one is, of course, the reboot. So let's jump right into Freddy versus Jason. Go ahead and hit me with some of your thoughts on that one.
So Freddy versus Jason, it came out when I was in college, and I definitely remember going to see it at the cinema. I mean, this is a film that was decades in development. You know, fans
Oh
were
yeah,
clamoring for this from like the 80s, and then it took to like 2003 before it saw the light of day. You know, two of horror's biggest monsters going head to head. It was something that everybody was excited for, and I remember being one of those people. And I think that maybe I'm in the minority of people that I quite enjoy this film. I've watched it a fair few times. It's quite harmless. It's that early 2000s sort of
yeah.
horror that, you know, it's very glossy and stylized and has a lot of, you know, rock music on the soundtrack, and it takes, like I say, it takes me back to when I was at college, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I'm in the same camp. I really enjoy it. It's a fun movie. As somebody who grew up in the 80s and who, was exposed to both of these juggernauts of horror, Freddy and Jason, that it's one of those things where everybody, I mean, we always were like, as kids, you're like, oh my God, that would be the coolest thing ever to see Freddy versus Jason, or, Freddy versus Michael, or, whoever. And it's one of those things that especially with Freddy versus Jason, because uh like Halloween kind of was like this early 80s thing, and then it had this, like, because I think the last time we saw Michael Myers was in 81. We didn't see him again until 88. And so most of the 80s wasn't Michael's, reign. That was like mostly Jason. And then towards the latter half, we got Freddy, and Freddy became this huge icon of horror. And so just being able to see them finally get it on screen was like, it's so I equate it kind of like, for me, I'm a huge Marvel comic book fan, and so I've grown up with all the comic books my whole life, and getting to see them do the stuff that they've been doing in the MCU with the crossing over and everything else has just been like this geeky dream come true. And Freddy versus Jason kind of sits in that same kind of geeky wheelhouse. So
Yeah, and I think it does a decent job with both of the characters, because you have got all of this legacy and mythos of
yes,
countless films in both franchises that have preceded, and also you've got to have your victims, and it's that balancing act of making sure that everybody has their moments. And I think that the writers and the director did a really nice job at balancing that. I mean, it opens with like Freddy's greatest hits, and I think it's a
yes,
really nifty way of introducing Jason and how he's going to use Jason. You know, there's this almost like film noir narration over the start of it where Freddy's like, I needed somebody, I needed a special adversary to do my bidding, to help me. And it's a really nice way of quickly explaining what Freddy's plan is. And I like how after all these films, the parents of Elm Street were just like, we got to do something. And it's like, shall we just like drug the kids so that they don't remember him anymore? Yeah, all right. I kind of like that, because it's what would you do to protect your children? And there's some very questionable
Yeah.
things that these parents are doing, but they are doing it for the greater good.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that it's really cool that they did a great job at, for me anyway, at kind of condensing the storylines of both Freddy and Jason and giving it to, like, because you both of them, the last Nightmare on Elm Street movie that had come out prior to this was 94, and the last Jason movie prior to this had been, I think, 93 with Jason X. I can't remember the date, but I think that's the year that that one came out. But so it had been, you know, a decade or close to a decade for both of these characters. So it was a nice little refresher to kind of, and also to give new watchers a a little bit of their backstory without being too heavy with it. And so I like that aspect of it. And then just jumping right into it with a new story and still kind of touching on some stuff, because that the drug that you mentioned is a drug from um, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. It's the
Mm.
drug that Nancy's taking to stop herself from having dreams. So it's these nice little things that they keep continuing on that, play into all of this. So,
Yeah, and like you say, it is that I watched it when I was at college. I had seen some of the existing films in the franchises, not necessarily all of them, but there were people who were going to it and this was their first Freddy or their first Jason film, and it presents enough information for them to not get lost, whilst at the same time kind of maybe piquing their interest into being like, well, I want to see, what this guy's about. I'm going to go and check out the other films and see how they got to hell.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's it's interesting too, because it's they say that Jason's in hell, and that follows up on the Jason Goes to Hell movie, and completely disregards Jason X, which is set in the future, which makes sense.
Yeah.
For the most part. But I feel like even then, for the most part, what this movie does is it kind of disregards even Jason Goes to Hell. Sure, it says he's in hell, but it kind of more is about what happened in the first eight. Um, and more to that point, more of the beginning stuff. It doesn't really, that's the nice thing. It doesn't go deep into Jason's like full history, because it doesn't need to. Same with Freddy. It just jumps right in, gives you the basic info, and just keeps you going. So, and it doesn't bog you down with all that extra stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, of the two series, it's Friday the 13th that went in some weird directions. So, is it
Yeah.
there's one of them where like the guy doing the autopsy like eats his heart or something, and then he becomes Jason.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of streamlining it down to he died at Crystal Lake, he was bullied, his mother died, they're the headlines. That's kind of all you need. You don't need this other stuff until you venture down that rabbit hole yourself.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a fun movie. It's just, the kills are fun. It feels sure, it's obviously an early 2000s movie. You get, these early 2000s actors and everything, which is again a nice thing, because you get to see oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name. Catherine Isabel,
Yeah.
um, who's kind of made a little career for herself around that time of being a new horror queen, being in Ginger Snaps and this, and oh, what's the other thing I'm thinking of? Oh, Bones. that kind of stuff around that same time period. So it's nice to see some some new horror people coming up that'll make a big splash during that era.
Yeah, I mean, I find the cast really, really interesting because when you watch it back, there's a lot of familiar faces. There's not necessarily a Johnny Depp in amongst them, but
Mm-hmm.
most people you recognize from other things. I mean, Brendan Fletcher, who plays Mark, he is a Canadian actor that pops up in a lot of stuff. He was in Supernatural. He was one of Azazel's children in Supernatural. He
Mm.
was most recently in Violent Night, where he played Krampus, the one of the bad guys.
Oh,
And yeah, I was like, Brendan Fletcher, and everyone else around was like, shh, sorry, but it's the dude from Freddy versus Jason.
that's funny. I
And
didn't catch that.
yeah, and then you've got Jason Ritter, who
Yes.
obviously like went on to be in some popular series. I think he's going to be in the new series of Yellow Jackets with his wife,
Okay.
and Lachlan Monroe,
Yes.
obviously one third of Destiny's Child, and
Yeah.
even sort of like your more side characters like Lindemann, played by Christopher Marquette. He will
Yeah.
be known to people from that era as being one of the three legs of the tripod in The Girl Next Door. There was just sort of so many faces that for me, even back then watching it as a teenager, there were so many familiar faces, and it's nice that they've all sort of continued to have careers. Not so much Monica Keena, but
Yeah.
Monica, she was a draw for me to go and watch the film because I was a big Dawson's Creek fan, and Abby Morgan was after like the main character of like Jen. She was like my next favorite character. I'll never sort of forgive the show for what they did to her in the second series because I think she was a really interesting character. So to sort of see her get to play the lead here was really exciting for me when I first watched it.
That's funny. Yeah. I was not, I don't think I was super familiar with her work. I didn't watch a lot of Dawson's Creek. I think I watched like the first season of it because of course Kevin Williamson writing on it was a big draw. But I didn't get into it super a lot because I was already an adult by then and it wasn't really hitting my demographic.
No one
but
needs to be reminded of those angsty teen years, you know.
but yeah, no, it's a but yeah, no, I think she does a really good job. I saw a I think it was a What Culture video recently, and they were giving her shit. Basically it was like talking about like horror movies with terrible final girls. Um, and I didn't think she was that bad at all. Like, you know, she's not, I'll agree, she's not super memorable in the, you know, in the great pantheon of final girls, but she wasn't terrible. So it's so weird sometimes these videos that you watch online that are just like just tear things down for no reason, just to be kind of just, I don't know, shitty. So
I mean, she's basically there to provide, you know, a victim for Freddy, and then
right.
you know the exposition about Jason and what they're going to do. She's not the traditional final girl per se. You know, she's
No.
no one's there for the final girl in this film. They are there to watch Freddy
Yeah.
and Jason fight.
Well, and
I
even
just
then, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's just a massive shame that that line from the trailer, you know, Freddy versus Jason, place your bets, that was never used in the final cut because maybe people would feel differently about her character if she'd had a chance to say that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's always it's interesting. It's always weird the like the lines that get cut that were in the trailer that are really cool. And then you get to the movie and they cut that line for some weird reason. You're like, but that was the cool line. Where is that cool line? Um, and speaking of Violent Night, they did that same thing. There's a line in the trailer for Violent Night that where David Harbour as Santa Claus says it's time for some seasons beatings or whatever, and it's not in the movie, and I was really disappointed. So, but yeah, as for her being a good final girl, and the motivations for Freddy and Jason stuff, they, Freddy's just there to stir up fear of himself, get his name back on the lips of the children of Elm Street. And it's not really about necessarily going after her specifically, like it has been for him for many of the other children that he's gone after.
Yeah, there's definitely, he just wants any victim that he can get, and she's kind of one of the first to start believing him in again. Because to say that the police are, it's this big secret, and at one point they tell Lachlan Monroe's character, like, we don't say his name. Well, you do, because that's how, like, she finds out about him at the beginning, because
Yeah,
she sees you having a little chat outside her house saying, oh, it was Kruger.
yeah,
So you have to question, the police force were better, there would have been no Freddy versus Jason.
yeah, yeah. No, yeah. That one dumb cop who said it, it was like, oh my god, these are all the same things going on. It's the same damn house. Yeah. If they had, if that one guy had just not said it, then Freddy would not have wormed his way back in. Um, not as easily, I guess. But I think that, yeah, it would have eventually happened. Somebody would have said it, and they would have heard it. So it's kind of hard to keep something like, especially because with the time frame, what they say was that it's only been like 4 years
Yeah.
since anything's happened, and 4 years is not really enough time to suppress that kind of information in my mind. Even in the early 2000s, where the internet wasn't as good as it is now in availability of information. But I still think that it Freddy still would have been talked about. So it's a little weird time wise, but but overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I think they, like we said, I think they do a really good job at putting putting the characters together, giving them a way to uh uh get them together in the first place, and uh getting them to fight. It's not just some stupid, mistake or anything else. And it makes sense. Freddy would, manipulate Jason to do his bidding and everything. So it especially when you hear, how often they had tried in the past, because they have been trying since the 80s to, make it work, and just anything else they had tried before just was not working. And to be fair, I've not looked at or heard about any scripts, um, like, and what the storylines could have potentially been before this one, and whether or not they might possibly have been good. But this seems like the best option to get them together in my mind.
Yeah, I know that, I think one of the original versions was they were both in hell, and they're both basically assassins for hell. And the devil kind of calls them both in and is like, I will let one of you, I'm going to send you both up, and whoever brings me the most souls, like, gets their freedom back, sort of thing. So it was, I
Hmm.
think that was one of the original ideas. But that kind of feels like two separate, it's going to be
Yeah.
Freddy attacking people and then I feel this is a more cohesive way of bringing them together. And I also thought it was quite interesting how they almost try to make Jason the sympathetic character. They really lay on almost like that he's this poor innocent child in a way, because obviously
Right.
these teenagers have got to pick a side, and it's child murderer or murdered child. And I think that the film really does sort of lay it on thick with, like, oh, poor Jason. And I thought it was a very interesting move to make, considering how recklessly he has mutilated various people throughout his
Yeah.
his career.
Yeah. He's not just a poor murdered child who came back for sure. especially for myself, having recently watched all of these movies. Yeah, that's not really his his backstory so much. Yes, sure, he was, hurt and everything, but there's a lot more rage behind everything. So I did read something that said that one of the potential backstory things that they were going to do with this script was that there was the potential that Freddy was actually Jason's father, um, which would have been some kind of in for him in that way. Uh, and I just was like, that would have just made things a little too weird and convoluted.
Yeah, that kind of leads you down that like Batman versus Superman, like my mother's called Martha too, doesn't it? It's
Yeah,
it's that kind of
yeah. And it's just weird. It's like, well, then why would they have motivation to fight? They'd just be like, oh, okay, it's just this father son reunion. It did not make sense to me at all. But I did like, I think that, like going back to the hypnosil type thing, I think that's an interesting plot point that they were, using this medicine that, had been uh introduced into the Friday the third, or into the Nightmare on Elm Street series, um with Nancy in number three, and that they had continued it, and it was the same, I guess, the same hospital um, from number three as well. And so it's interesting to see them pull all this through. This really feels like, in a lot of ways, it feels really a lot more like a continuation of the Nightmare on Elm Street series, with just throwing in Jason
yeah,
more
I
than anything
agree.
else. So
Yeah, it definitely feels stronger. And I guess for me, maybe that's why I enjoyed it so much when I first watched it, because I had definitely seen more Nightmare on Elm Streets than I had Friday the 13th at that point in time. So I quite
right,
liked that sort of continuation of Freddy's story, and like you said, the links back with the hospital and the drugs and things and the house. It's all quite subtle. Again, if you're new to the story, it doesn't make a bit of difference. But if you sat there for however many films, there's something for you to pull out and be like, oh, that's cool. Oh yeah, and that I remember this. I remember that person.
right. Yeah, no, and it's cool in that way. I like, and I know that because it came out through New Line, and New Line um had gotten the rights to Jason after number eight, that I'm and New Line is, always, it's been called the house that Freddy built. So of course Freddy's going to be the main, like, character in a lot of ways in this. They're just going to continue his storyline because that's for them, and then technically he gets top billing. It's Freddy versus Jason.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to look at that now, and something I didn't think about on earlier watches, on how much this is clearly a continuation more of his story, and you know Jason's just being used. And it's, I mean, obviously Jason's being used, but just for, even for the purposes of the story, they're just taking it and making a new continuation on the Freddy mythos. So
Yeah, and I like
um
how they work in sort of the different Freddys, because obviously Freddy began as this quite terrifying character. He was always quite chatty with his victims and
right,
was, quite, he would tease them in a really malevolent way. But obviously, as we know, as those films went on, he became more of a caricature. And I liked how the deaths in Freddy versus Jason, there was sort of one that was a bit more fun, the whole one with the stoner guy where he appears
yeah,
as this like strange like worm creature. But then you've also got the one with Katie Isabel, where it's sort of back to the original Nightmare on Elm Street, where she's being tormented as she's walking around this
yeah,
never ending locker room.
yeah. No, it was, yeah, no, I agree. I think that's, it was interesting to see kind of different facets of Freddy. You got him very scary. You got him being very silly, in the fight between him and Jason, and he's acting like he's playing pinball. And so you're getting these different facets of the character, and that's a good point because I didn't even think about that until you just said it. um but that's especially for people who complain about how Freddy did at, over the time become very watered down and very much a caricature of who he was, a due to his popularity. I think that's what watered him down in a lot of ways. And I think that's again that brings that's what's fun about Freddy versus Jason. It's interesting to see when people talk about it and they don't like it. um it's they find that the movie's very silly in a lot of ways, but it is, I feel like there are a lot of really good horror moments. And upon watching uh the entirety of the Friday the 13th series recently, that the kills are much more violent in this, in a lot of ways, much more gruesome, especially for some of the Friday the 13th stuff. So it's interesting to see that, to see the complaints about it, but then to go back and go, it's really not that bad. It's really fun. And I don't know. I think sure, people can dislike something. They can dislike it for whatever their reasons or whatever, but sometimes it just rings hollow to me. So
And it does have some quite interesting little touches as well. I mean, particularly around Catherine Isabel's character of Gib. She's in this awful toxic relationship.
oh
That
yeah,
we've seen jocks in slasher films before, and normally the quote unquote bimbo that they're with, is loving it and is going along with it. But this guy is toxic. All he does is sort of order her around and tells her not to do this and not to do that. I think that's a very relatable scenario for a lot of people, unfortunately. And then you also have this absolutely awful moment, which to me is the scariest part of the film. Is she is lying there in the cornfields under attack from Freddy
mm-hmm. Yeah,
in her mind, and then there's this really creepy guy covered in glow sticks that sort of sees her and is like, unconscious girl. And he starts to do the unthinkable before then
yep,
hero Jason in this instance comes
yeah,
and just spears him away. I think there's some, you don't necessarily expect to see that in a film like this. You like your characters to be the tropey jock, bimbo, brain,
yeah,
but there is, particularly with this character, there's a strange amount of complexity within it.
yeah, no, yeah. And that's that the the filmmakers going for that as well was interesting too, because yeah, I when watching it this time, it's something I guess I didn't really catch before. I mean, you catch it and you understand what's happening,
Yeah.
but it's, I guess that it's one of those things that you kind of just accepted along with this kind of movie back then, but now in this day and age, it comes on a whole different level of just ickiness that um adds that interesting layer. It's you know um she's being attacked by Freddy in the dream world, and she's being attacked in in the real world as well. And Jason coming to, not necessarily her rescue because she gets killed at the same time, but it's it's that interesting, you know yeah, Jason saves her in a way from the outside world of violation before Freddy can get her. So it's very complex.
Yeah.
It's there's a lot of layers there that you can, and that is true. There's a lot of layers going on to a lot of this. Kelly Rowland's character is dealing with this. She's not happy with her nose the entire time, and that's a interesting thing about the fixation of beauty culture in society of our of that time, and since, and even before and since that time, and just seeing that, because there was a lot of that kind of focus on changing your body through plastic surgery. um so it's interesting to see that playing a role in this kind of movie as well.
Yeah, it's just not stuff that you expect or like you say necessarily remember in the first watch through, but then when you kind of look at it a few years later with a different head, it's like, well, actually, that's quite an interesting thing that they placed in there, and that they put like why it could have just been showdown, 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 but they did take the time with the fodder, for want of a better word,
Yeah,
to make them a little bit richer than what we'd come to expect, especially from the Friday the 13th series.
yeah, yeah, definitely, yeah. With the Friday the 13th series especially has been more of just trope and caricatures of people: the final girl, the slutty girl, the jock, the stoner. All of these have always been the tropey characters, and to get a little bit more nuance in something that is inside that same franchise is a little bit more fun and interesting than we had gotten up until this point.
Yeah, I think the only sort of negative for me in a way is through watching various documentaries is hearing about the handling of the casting for Jason. Kane Hodder had
Mm-hmm.
previously played the character and had been one of the most vocal campaigners for this film to happen, and he was sort of told by the studios, yeah, it's going to happen, go get your machete. And then he sort of found out as it went into development, like properly, that he was not going to be Jason. And I think that was, having watched his documentary and hearing him speak in Camp Crystal Lake Memories, it's just kind of feels like they did him a little dirty, which is
Oh
is
yeah.
a shame.
Yeah, it's for somebody who had played him for the previous four movies and had kind of redefined that role as his, it was definitely a dirty move, for sure. And I'm not surprised, given that I also read that Ronnie Yu, the director, had assured Catherine Isabel that she wouldn't have to do any nudity, and she had put an no nudity clause into her contract for the film. And as soon as they got in, he started pressuring her to do that shower scene, uh, that they ended up, finally settling on using a body double for. But yeah, he pressured her into doing that early on in the um, uh, filming, and it kind of soured uh, the filming for her for the rest of it. So,
Yeah, I was at a convention a few years ago that she was attending, and somebody somebody asked a really inappropriate question about her being nude in that, and she was like, well, I'm sorry, but it wasn't me, it was a body double. And even though it's not her, she stuck to her guns and she didn't agree to do it, the general consensus to most people is that is her, and she's still being subjected to the attention that she didn't want and therefore didn't want to do. So again, it's another sort of sour note to the production that
yeah,
they felt that they had to have. Like, it's just, she could have easily been post shower and doing her hair in the mirror. She didn't. I know that
there
these
was
films have
absolutely
this,
no need
yeah.
for that scene. Yeah,
I know that the series, especially Friday the 13th, is known for like gratuitous nudity, but it felt really gratuitous in this setting.
absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, again, for the most part, like, of the three main characters, the three main girl characters, that, she was the only one who, um, had to do that. None of the other characters, Monica Keena and Kelly Rowland's characters, neither one of them had to be put in that position. There was no real reason for her to be put in that position. Um, and so, it's and I'm all for gratuitous nudity in these movies, and that's fine if that's you know agreed on all parts. Um, you
Exactly.
know, it's not if you're trying to pressure somebody into doing it and or and having to use a body double to get around that, then that's just, and especially for again a scene that's just not necessary. There's no real reason to have that scene in there. It doesn't add anything to the plot of the story for her to be naked in there. So
No, no,
um
not at all.
no, so it's just that, yeah, between that and the Kane Hodder stuff, yeah, it's a fun movie, but it does have its issues. Um, you know, and mostly just on the production side of that. And it does make you question, you know, some of that, but you know, overall, it's a enjoyable movie that kind of caps off both of their series in a way to kind of give them a nice send off. I think um, both
Yeah,
Freddie and
and they
Jason get some
yeah, and
good moments.
it's so it's got this big battle and stuff, and everyone's like, oh, who's going to win? And it ends where Freddy fans can argue that Freddy won, and Jason fans can argue that Jason won. I think it was a really clever move, because something like Aliens versus Predator, it's much more clear cut which
Yeah,
species won. But in this, you can read it the end of the film is Jason walking out with Freddy's head. You could go, oh well, Jason's won because look, Freddy's not got a head. But then you can also go, yeah, but Freddy's head is winking, so
yeah,
he's not gone yet. He can enter people's, he can find his way out of this. I thought that was a nice way to leave it open for both of their series to come back. And obviously they did in very well. I guess they both decided to do the reboot route.
the reboot route. Yep. And let's jump right into that reboot, which is interesting because both Freddy versus Jason and the reboot are written by the same people, but they are very different tonally and just in general. This The reboot is more of an actual reboot. It's kind of retells, um, you know, the overall story with some interesting quick nods to really the first three original movies.
Yeah,
You kind of get this gloss over of the final moments of the first movie with the battle between oh, I can't remember her name, Pamela Voorhees and the counselor at the end. um and so you get this quick beat, and it kind of fills in that little bit of backstory. You don't need a lot, which is good. But it goes in, and this is a much darker, more serious take on the franchise. What did you think?
I was working at the cinema when this one came out, and I went to see this on opening day, which was a Friday the 13th in the UK. And it was in our second biggest screen, and it was the middle of the day, and it was like near enough sold out. So the energy was really high. And
Yeah,
I really I have a very soft spot in my heart for this film. Like, I've seen the other Friday films, but I think for me, I just I just like its production values, because the first one almost feels sort of like documentary style in a way. It's very like rough in terms of its cinematography, but this one is it's very glossy, and it's very that opening 20 minutes or whatever is a really nice misdirect, because like you say, it fills in the first film open over the opening credits, and then you're straight into like the films 2 and 3 sort of coexisting. You've got Sack Jason. You get the evolution of the masks,
yeah,
which takes him several films to get that hockey mask, and they still kept that in this reboot. I think it was a really interesting way to open it, because you get invested in these characters, because you think, okay, these are our people. And then 20, 25 minutes in, they're all pretty much dead, and then
Yeah.
you're resetting and starting again with these new characters. And I think it was something that hadn't necessarily been done a lot at that stage.
Yeah, I think this is I think out of like a lot of the reboots that we got during this era, I think this is definitely um the much better, more successful in a lot of ways. At least for me. I enjoy it. I think it's a fun movie. It's definitely the production value, they definitely put some money into it. I There's a part of me that really wants a little bit more camp to it. Um, that sometimes it takes itself a little too seriously. Not a ton. Because the character of Trent is just horrible.
Yeah.
So you do have some fun, goofy, campy moments. I was actually It's so funny too because upon this rewatch, I realized that Ryan Hansen is in this movie,
Yeah.
and I guess I didn't realize that before. Maybe I just didn't recognize him because I've never been. Um, Ryan Hansen's one of those actors who I've come to appreciate in recent years, and so it's one of those things that is going back and watch it now. I was like, oh hey, so there's it. That's another reason why I like going back to movies like this is that you recognize people upon these rewatches that you may not have caught before. Um, but this one's definitely this one is more like what you think Friday the 13th is. There's
Yeah.
like a lot of gnarly kills. There's a lot of sex and nudity. And so this is when you think about what Friday the 13th is, this movie does it. This movie does it right, in a lot of ways, that even the Friday the 13th movies themselves didn't do as well because of studio interference and the 80s being what they were, that they cut out a lot of the gore and uh, a lot of the I wouldn't even say they cut out a lot of nudity because even in the 80s they had some. But it's just interesting to go back and think, because people complain about the 80s movies being so filled with gore and everything, and they weren't. They were really tame in comparison. And now, especially like with this movie's pretty gnarly.
Yeah. There's some really mean deaths. I mean, the sleeping
Yeah,
bag is brutal. There's the bear trap. There's, I mean,
yeah,
just the viciousness of the guy who gets the axe in his back, and it's a trap. It's to lure the friends out, and the friends are like, I ain't going out there. It's There's a brutality to the fact that he's left in pain to die. That's something that not many slashers have done. Normally they would go out and try and save him, and they themselves would end up dead. But this one was like, no, we're gonna play it the other way, and it's really mean. It's really really mean when you think about
yeah,
it.
yeah. No, I agree. This Jason is a much more mean spirited, much more calculating, um, much much more intelligent Jason than and not that Jason was ever really dumb, but he was focused and he was more about just, killing people left and right and didn't really calculate like this one does. And this one's, you know, setting traps, like you said, and doing things in a way like, they trip over a trap. Danielle Panabaker's character trips over like a tripwire that has little bells that alert him in his underground lair. Um, and so it's interesting that they have this, or that this Jason was much more intelligent and um, cunning than any previous one.
Yeah, and just I think there's 13 deaths in it, which obviously ties in nicely to the film
Yeah,
title. But I think you sort of go through them all, and they're all they're all pretty memorable. You've got the one with Ryan Hansen with the speedboat
Yeah.
with the bow and arrow. Jason
Yeah.
is proficient proficient at archery, and then the woman who he's with, she's swimming, and then she kind of thinks that she's safe because she's in the water, and then she isn't. And then there's the poor girl with the perfect nipple placement,
Yeah.
who she gets smothered, she gets hung on like some antlers, she gets shot by Trent through the door, and then she like gets thrown out of the window onto the car. So
Yeah.
there's a lot going on in this, and I think that's what, especially more, I say modern, but obviously it was like 2009. But I think that's what audiences were wanting from their films, because particularly the first Friday the 13th, there wasn't as many people to murder, so it took a while to get to them. But here, I get it. I mean, the film's quite short. You probably got a death like every 10 minutes, if that. It really
Yeah.
does just keep going and going, and has some like unexpected deaths as well, which I thought was quite exciting at the time.
Yeah, it's a fun ride. It's definitely, it's kind of the greatest hits of Jason in a lot of ways.
Mm.
They're wanting to, jump people back into this series, and I feel like it was a good, like I said before, I feel like it was a good uh reboot, and I hate that it had gotten, since then it's gotten bogged down in all the legal issues that it's had, that we never got a continuation of this particular series, this version of the series, because it would have been fun to continue down this road and see where it went.
Yeah, I agree, because like I said, it changed up things that you like. Danielle Panabaker's character, you kind of meet her and you think, oh, final girl. She's the
Yeah.
sensible one in her partying group. She doesn't drink, she doesn't do drugs. She goes to help this man that she's just met, try and find his missing sister. And she is just ungraciously thrown away. It's like
Yeah.
as soon as Clay finds his sister, it's like, oh, you can die now. And I
Yeah.
remember being quite shocked. I kept thinking, oh, she's going to come back, or they're going to go back and rescue her. But no, she's just gone. So to
Yeah.
see what they would have done in another film, when they are so flippant as to do that to who would normally be our final girl, I think would have been a really interesting thing to see.
Yeah, I think it's funny too, because it's, Jared Padalecki is as Clay looking for his sister, who was part of the party in the beginning. And we I think it's funny too, because you almost, he gets to live. Him and the sister get to live by the end of it. And it's just, you know, was that something where, because Jared Padalecki was on Supernatural at the time and he was a big star in TV world and everything, that he got to live? It was
Yeah,
was that the reasoning behind it? It was like, you can't kill him. He's too big of a star. Um
maybe it's just
it, it's
I find it strange, because I think this was the same year that Jensen made
yeah.
the My Bloody Valentine remake, and
Yeah.
just it is, especially at that time, it was strange to see one without the other. And when you've got Clay searching for a missing family member, that's right what series 1 and 2 of Supernatural is all about. So it was a weird, like, old world Sam in a way. And then
Yeah.
equally, when I was watching My Bloody Valentine, and you see Jensen sort of getting taken over, it's like, oh, it's okay, Sam will turn up in a minute and it'll all be fine. It was very strange to see both of these actors in these different properties, because at that time especially, they were so intrinsically linked to Supernatural. And I think for both of them, that show almost stifled their movie career,
Yeah.
because they were so very much Sam and Dean. It's taken both of them to finish that show, to be able to move on to other properties and to be seen in different ways.
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. I think that definitely, and see, so I'm one of the rare people who really likes the My Bloody Valentine remake. more than the original. Um, I can appreciate the original, but for some reason, it just maybe because I only saw it, within the last few years, that it just, and I saw the remake, probably around the time that it came out. So I really like the remake, and it's and I think that I like the remake because again, it's during that it came out in 2009, and it's during that era where things were more the kills were more brutal and everything, and then going back and watching My Bloody Valentine, the original, and then seeing that and going, oh, these, it's so tame, it's such a weird
Yeah.
story, it's a lot goofier in a lot of ways. um and so it's I every time I've watched the original, you know since then, I gain more appreciation for it. I can see why people enjoy it, and I like it. I just I still like the remake more. So
Yeah, I mean, I kind of knew that I was going to get on with the Friday the 13th reboot just purely because of Marcus Nispel, because I really enjoyed what he did with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but I kind of prefer his version, and that I think that's just because I watched it. I watched it before I watched the original,
right,
but when you compare the two, the one with Jessica Biel, it's a punchier pace, and
there's more story to it too.
it's more violent. I remember watching the foot and hearing all this stuff, and it takes a long
Yeah,
time. A lot of the deaths are not particular. You don't really see much. There's implied violence, and that obviously can
the
be
original.
just as much of a thing to be scared of as actually seeing it. But it just kind of left me a bit underwhelmed. I mean, my mum was the same. Like, my mum watched it when it first came out, and obviously it was this big like video nasty thing, and she sort of watched it and was like, "What?" So I kind of shared that. But when I saw like that version, I was like, "Oh, this is mean. This is nasty. This is gory. This is." This I like this. So when I heard that he was also doing Friday the 13th, it's like, well, yeah, I'll watch it. And I think it does, it kind of repeats that formula that worked so well in that Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake again here.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I think, for me, um, I'm not a fan of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies at all. I've watched several of them now, and including the version done by Marcus Nispel. That and even that one, it's okay. It's just not my thing. I think just the overall story just doesn't grab me more than anything else. But I do appreciate what he brought to that story. And like you said, it's much more violent, much more gritty and raw, in a way that, and glossy in a way too,
Yeah.
that the original just for me really doesn't pull off as well. I and it's the same thing even with this Friday the 13th reboot, is that it condenses the story of Jason down to its bare bones and gives you this new version of him, like we said, that's more calculating, more cunning, and just more mean than the version before. The version before is just a rage machine, just going on pure instinct, um, more than anything else. And this one, he's whatever his motivations are, um, that it's just it's more about just keeping people away from his area,
Yeah.
and so it's just um so I like what he did with this movie, with what Nispel did with this movie, and kind of just takes that core essence of what Jason is, and brings it into a version into the modern age. So
Yeah. I mean, I hope that my film taste has sort of matured. I can definitely appreciate a slow burn these days,
yeah,
but when I was, late teens, early 20s, which was when both of these films that we're talking about came out, I was very much like, make it glossy, make it like MTV, you know, make it CW. And I mean, this reboot, you can't really get more CW because it's got like half of the cast were either in or have gone on to be in CW shows. So that was
Yeah.
definitely, at that point in my life, they were definitely the sort of films that I gravitated towards. And I think because I did watch them at that age, they have worked their way into my heart. And this film especially is one that I can watch easily every couple of years without just, even if it's on in the background while I'm doing some writing, it's, I know the plot beats and everything. It's quite nice just to have on as background noise.
That's interesting. Yeah. No, I think, and, and like I said before, I think it's interesting that that both of these movies were written by the same people. That one, they did a version that is very much um the original Jason in a lot of ways, and then one is this new, uh more updated, and only with a distance of 6 years from each other. The Freddy versus Jason was in 2003 and the reboot was in 2009. So it's interesting to see their differing versions on that, and where they went, in deconstructing it both times in a lot of ways, breaking it down to their essences, um and seeing the differences in what they did, in each movie.
And it's also the seeing which bits they picked out as the fans are going to like this. So Sack Jason and the acquisition of the hockey mask
Right.
isn't too dissimilar to the original way that he got the mask. It's like with Freddy versus Jason with Freddy, it's peppering those things in. So if you are a fan of the franchise, it's like, oh well, yeah, that is just like in film two, and that's like in this one, and that's like in that one. I think that was a really nice way, because I think Jason is a harder character to work that kind of stuff in than somebody like Freddy, because as we discussed, Freddy's stories were more of a continuation than
Right.
Friday the 13th. So trying to stuff in those little Easter eggs must have been quite the challenge.
Yeah. No, agreed. Yeah, I think they do a good job. I like both of these movies. They're both, high up there for me, in the franchise, um for the fact um that they do a good job at distilling, what Jason is as a character, um with without burdening him with too much extraneous, extra stuff. You just, he's the kid who drowned in the water, and his mom had a murder spree, and then he came back and continued on with that. That's basically the core.
Yeah.
And you don't need much more than that. So it's nice to see them do that and do it in two different ways, because definitely I think Freddy versus Jason is more of the crowd pleasing, fun, combo movie that everybody wanted. Um, and then you get this nice, more serious take on the mythos, in the reboot. Uh, it's nice to see, and especially coming from the same writers, to see them take those, changes and twist them, in the ways that they needed for both of the movies to get to do. And I mean, to be fair, the directors, have a large part in crafting that as well. But it's, nice to see that the writers, knew what Jason was, and I think they did him justice.
Yeah, he's definitely a scarier, more formidable Jason in this than
Yes.
Freddy vs. Jason. To some respects, he is kind of just a puppet in the previous film, but in this, he's like a train coming towards you.
Yeah.
It's, you can't help but kind of feel bad for these characters that have unknowingly ended up in his way, because he is just this never ending machine, and that always makes for a good slasher killer, is when it is unstoppable and you can look at it and go, yeah, no, I would not like to be in that place.
Absolutely. All right. Is there anything else you want to say about either one of these movies that we didn't touch on?
I guess in just in the casting, just a little shout out to Aaron Yo, who was actually in both the reboot of this and in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. It's
Oh,
a nice little yeah, he's in the Nightmare on Elm Street remake when Nancy, she's like looking for information. He is one of the former classmates who moved away, and he's like keeping a video diary of how many days or whatever he's been awake. So he pops up there, and then he's also in this one where he gets obviously murdered by Jason. I thought it's a nice little strange link between
that is
Freddy and
interesting.
Jason. Like when Elm
Yeah,
Street, and it's like there was a little triangle. Like you go out from Freddy versus Jason, and you hit Aaron Yo whichever way you go.
that's very cool. Yeah, definitely. I think I know I've seen the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot, but it's been a long time. And I'll be rewatching it for an upcoming series on Nightmare on Elm Street. So that'll be an interesting watch for sure. I'll keep my eye out for him. All right. Well, let's let people know where they can find you on the internet, and anything you happen to be working on that you want people to pay attention to.
So I can be found on Letterboxd and Twitter at Gizmo Shikari, and should Twitter disappear, I'm also on Hive at Kat Hughes. And in terms of writing, most of my stuff is on the hollywoodnews.com, but there's also various pieces. I've just done something on Ginger Snaps for Ghouls Magazine's website, which was a lot of fun. And I actually saw in the new year having a very lovely 2 hour long chat with Cal Gallner for an interview, which will be in a forthcoming copy of Film Stories UK.
Awesome. That's very cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming back on again. You are always a delight to have on. Uh, and you always bring a lot of fun stuff to talk about and to think about. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Kat for joining me. Next episode, Donna returns to celebrate Black History Month with me as we talk the original Candyman and its most recent sequel. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.